Okay, in this next one, I really want you to have worked the problems from example number 52, parts C, D, E, F, and G that you see here. 53 we've already worked, of course. And before you look at each problem, if you have worked them, then you'll be able to check yourself. And that's more what I would like to have you do in this particular one. Now I'm going to go over each of these, so if you haven't worked them, please pause, work all of those examples, and then go through each example with me. So we start here with part C. Nothing really in particular here except for just make sure that you're adding the opposite to do that problem and that you're doing the opposite of 2 squared here. In the next problem, make sure that you're treating absolute value signs as parentheses, so you do what's inside them first and then evaluate the parentheses. So you see that we have a -8 plus a -2/3, which we add together, which gives us a -8 2/3, and then from there, we can take the absolute value, which gives us the +8 2/3, and then we're multiplying a negative times a positive, plus we're multiplying fraction, a whole number, and a mixed number here. And then moving on to part E. In this particular one, we have all kinds of fraction problems going on in this one, so I'd like you to pay particular attention to your fractions and the fact that when we end up down here, we end up with a fraction in our numerator, and we don't want to forget that this fraction bar does mean division. So you'll see that I've simplified across here, gotten all my whole numbers to simplify down to the -5, and then a -5 plus a -2.5, which means I'm adding those two up and carrying along the negative sign. And then what we have at that point is let's see, that was, what did I do there? a -5, and oh, I see what it was. There's 2 positive numbers and 2 negative numbers. So I added the 2 positive numbers. That's where I got the 30, and the 2 negative numbers, I'm of course adding them and keeping that negative sign. That's where the -7.5 came from. And then those two added together, you see that down here in purple. And I did need an improper fraction because I was doing a division, so I did that work as an improper fraction. So 45 halves divided by the -2, and that's where our final answer came from. Now moving on to part F here, one of the things I really want you to notice here is that you don't take the absolute value of this first part and then add it to the absolute value of the second part. That's not correct. That's not how you use parentheses. Remember, absolute value signs are parentheses, so you want to make sure that you do what's inside of them. Then, after you've evaluated that, then take the absolute value. This problem, again, we have an opposite of a 2 squared, so we end up with a -4, which makes a 0 on the bottom, and no other answer is acceptable there besides the undefined. Part G here, we have the opposite of -7 squared, so we have a -7 times a -7, and then down in the bottom, calling out here that again the parenthesis, the absolute values are parentheses, so you do what's inside of it first. And once we have evaluated inside of it, then we can evaluate the absolute value. So we have an improper fraction here, and then once we have the improper fraction evaluated, then we see we need to reduce, and I showed a different way of doing a GCF down here. That's the one that I don't like to go into because it's doing factors. So I'm going to leave that work for you, but I'm still not going to say anything about it. If you want to come and talk to me one-on-one about that, that would be perfectly fine, but I don't want to go into that in the lecture. So that wraps up order of operations